Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is a very strange experience for me, doing this virtually, and it's a great um, sadness that I'm not able to see everybody and say hello to people as we do normally. But I'd like to, nonetheless, even without being able to see you, and I'm just looking at my laptop screen, so that's very strange for me. I'd like to welcome everybody to this fAD virtual support group meeting, and I know that we have a whole a very good number of people signed up, and hopefully they've managed to make it into the system. There is an opportunity if you want to ask questions at any time. Please do feel free to use that, and if you have trouble hearing or there's a problem, we can't sort your internet out, but if somebody is speaking and it's not clear, please do let the organizers know via the question panel. So hopefully people have received an agenda. What we've got through the next hour and a half, hour and 3/4 or so, we'll have some brief presentations, a little bit about developments in rare dementia support, which Seb Crutch and Nikki Zimmerman, who I imagine many of you know. I'll talk a little bit about clinical trials, what's new, what's happening, what we think is coming forward, and I'm really a very poor second stand-in to Kath Mummery, who unfortunately was planning to be here, but I'm sure she won't mind saying had to urgently go to the dentist, which is certainly I'd much prefer to be here than what she's having to do. So, and then we have Antoinette O'Connor will talk a little bit about blood biomarkers and how they have really showing tremendous potential in a way that I would never have thought before, and how that will accelerate research. Then we've got a brief presentation by Sophie. We have Dame Hazel Genn, who's UCL Laws, was head of UCL Laws, and has a really an amazing sort of setup that is to improve access to justice more widely, but working closely with RDS in what we've found a really helpful partnership to provide, and she'll tell you more about this, to provide professional support and advice to people for legal problems through the fAD support group. So that's something there. And then we'll have a Q&A session, which I do hope, if there is anybody listening to this, that people will submit questions, and we'll try and deal with that as a whole panel. So that's a little bit how I think the next little while will go. And at the very end, we have a tradition of people going off to the pub together, and that will be a little bit more difficult because people are all around the UK and perhaps a bit more widely for this session. So going to the pub is a little bit more difficult, but we'll try and do a virtual alternative to that. So what I thought just before I get stuck into the program, I think that it is, in these times, it's clearly very difficult for people in many different ways, and everybody people are listening to this webinar will have very different circumstances. And what's being clear, not just from the fAD support group, but from our other support groups, is just how many new challenges this whole lockdown has presented for people. People caring for somebody, or people with juggling multiple different responsibilities, or people who have difficult home circumstances for other reasons. So what we've noticed is a great increase in the number of approaches to RDS for support. And what I would like to do is to extend a very, very positive encouragement to people. If within the fAD support group community, if there are people who feel that they'd like to make contact with, would like with somebody else in a similar situation, or would like to ask advice from any of the support group members, from myself, our specialist nurses or counsellors, then please do feel that you're very, very welcome and encouraged to do that. And we would like to utilize the great experience that people have had generally in families and in managing and working with fAD, to share that experience and help each other. And I'm very mindful that the people listening to this webinar, or whenever I speak at an fAD support group, the real experts are amongst yourselves, and you may not realize quite how much expertise you have through lived experience, and we'd be grateful for your help in sharing that experience. So really, that's all I wanted to say in the way of welcome and introduction, and I very much look forward to seeing people in person again. It's not just through the support group that we're not seeing people. Our research has been, our natural history studies have been paused, so people who would have come up for research, or I would see, have not. But we are already making plans. I was on a call earlier for how we're gradually restarting. The National Hospital is restarting with appropriate distancing and precautions, increasingly setting up for routine and elective clinical work, but also for research. So welcome, and I'd like to start with an introduction. I think several of you have met Helen Rice, who's joined us as a specialist dementia research nurse. A year ago, she came along when she hadn't even started the job, which I think that's shows great commitment. And so it's a shame that she is not coming to see you all in person this time. So I'm going to just hand over to Helen now, who is just going to explain a little bit about who she is and her role for a moment or two before we get into the program. So I can't hear anybody's responses, but I'm going to assume that everybody's able to be keeping up with that and can hear me. So Helen.
Hi, hello everybody. I hope you can hear me. So yes, my name's Helen Rice, and I'm the familial Alzheimer's disease research nurse. As Nick mentioned, I've been lucky to be in post since around June last year, and I do hope that I've got to meet many of you already throughout this time, whether through clinic or research, or yes, possibly just at that support group meeting last year when I did look rather rabbit in the headlights, I have to admit, for most of the afternoon, but it was a great experience. So in terms of this role that I've taken on, a big part of that is around extending the reach of the team, the department, in terms of identifying and inviting families and individuals to take part in research and access support with us, and also starting to deliver some of that research activity in people's homes. Whilst we've made big steps towards that coming together, there's still clearly a lot more to be done, not least navigating COVID and the new challenges that's bringing to things like home visits and research. But yes, so just a hello from me, and to say thank you to all of you who I've worked with this year, and I look forward very much to meeting and working with everybody over this year and hopefully years to come. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I have to learn to unmute and mute correctly. So thank you very much, Helen. I'd now like to hand over to, I think it's Seb and Nikki, and I will get rid of my camera so that you have more screen to see them. But Seb and Nikki, over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Hi to everyone. One of the great pains of these online virtual support groups, not only be able to see you but give you a hug and say hi, and to see you welcoming each other, because we know that the most important thing about the support groups is the community that you guys form with each other, and we know that this is a poor substitute, but we'll do our best. My duty for the next couple of minutes is just to report really on what I feel has been a very exciting year for rare dementia support as a whole. I guess it's been particularly exciting because of the relatively humble beginnings of the support groups. I believe this is, although Sophie and others will correct me, I believe this is the 10th anniversary year of the start of the fAD support group. And really the groups began in a very small way, a small number of people known to us at Queen Square, meeting together informally, and it was really about the meetings and not a huge amount else. And over the years, individual support, first with Jill and now with the fantastic Nikki, who you'll hear from in a moment, and the direct support team, are really trying to provide more fulsome support, and to all of you, whether you have one of these conditions, are living at risk, or care for or about someone who does. The developments over the past year have ranged from the sort of boring but important stuff like getting legal advice and UCL more fulsome support for what we do, down to the nitty-gritty of knowing that being reassured that our volunteers, anyone volunteering to run one of our 26 regional support groups around the UK, is insured by UCL and feels like they're part of the team. Through to more exciting developments like the new website, the fantastic work that Kaylee, Emily and others have done in trying to share the stories that you so kindly offer, and to talk more broadly, and to help people to learn more about these conditions, whether they're living with one or trying to work with and support someone who is. And also another great aspect of the last year in particular, though for many years, is the support of the National Brain Appeal, who you'll see a short video from later on, who've really been all guns blazing to try and get funding to support the kind of work that we do and want to do, whether that's applying for grants to get us our first ever education officer, who can be creating resources that you can share with professionals who perhaps have never met anyone with familial Alzheimer's disease before, or never even considered the specific impact of having a young onset form of dementia, through to things like we're currently advertising for our first Admiral nurse, because we're aware that as a group that is based in a clinical centre, particularly somewhere like London, we often don't, we have been very engaged with people at the diagnostic stage and in the early stages of their time living with a dementia, but perhaps less so further into their condition. And so recruiting someone who has particular expertise in supporting people in the middle and later stages of dementia is something that's also really important to us. I guess, as Nick would have also mentioned last year, it's also critical to us that we look to the future. And so an important part of that are the exciting plans to create the first ever in the world rare dementia support centre as a home and a basis for all of the work we do and the good practice that we want to share around the UK and around the world. But I think a key thing, obviously we're adapting with those plans. We're at the exciting stage of looking at sites, but don't envisage meeting physically together for a little while. And that's why it's important now for Nikki to update you a little bit about how the team have been responding to this COVID-19 crisis and some of the innovations, particularly around small online support group discussions, which we'd really encourage you to be part of if you feel able to. So huge thank you from me for all contributions that some of which you'll hear about later on today, and an encouragement really to use and be in touch with us. We've got a more and more solid set of foundations and framework to try and make good on the good suggestions and ideas that you have about guiding us as to how to better support you in the years to come. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Seb. That's great. And hello to everybody. And again, apologies that we can't see you in person, because that's the part that I really enjoy. I met a lot of you last year at the first group. I hadn't started in my post long then, so it was good to come along. And I wish I could be there again this year, but this is what we can do, and we're making the most of it. I'm getting very used to this because this is something that I'm not used to doing, and technology isn't my strong point, but I'm getting quite used to it now and quite enjoying it. So a little bit about the team I lead, the direct support team. So it's myself and Claire in Livy, which some of you may have already had some contact with. And we're here to support all the members, and that's about 2,000 members, including health professionals as well. Our role's quite varied. We're involved in all the support groups, the setting up of the support groups and the meetings and the newsletters, but also the premise of our role is really supporting people through telephone and online support, so please do get in contact with us. We have noticed a huge increase in the need of support over the sort of lockdown period. It's been a very anxious time for a lot of people, and I'll tell you a little bit about the sort of support calls that we've been doing sort of throughout that. Seb mentioned some extra support group meetings that we've put on, and we've been doing 2 of these a week, just small groups, so about 12 people each. Part of it is information giving, so we've done some support groups on getting to know health professionals and who you should have in your team to help you, which has been quite an eye-opener for some of the participants, I must say. And we've done some great groups on empowering people that are newly diagnosed, and some great groups on advanced care planning as well. So we've really noticed people coming together in these groups and sharing experience and really supporting each other, and actually wanting to share contact details afterwards, setting up some sort of buddying scheme. So that's been amazing. So within our role, we do a lot of things from sort of navigating people, and this is really sort of important for sort of this support group, I feel, because nobody sort of knows the pathway, nobody knows where to go, they struggle with the GP. So just actually helping people get into that system. So we work a lot, especially with Kath Mumley on this, making sure people are in the right place to be assessed properly. And then we work with the clinical teams afterwards to help support the patients and the carers, the understanding of their new diagnosis and their situation and what this is going to mean for their families. And we try to help them with the emotional, practical sort of side of this, with coping strategies and sort of planning for the future. A lot of our job is navigating people for the health and social care systems, which is a total net a maze and seems to differ from area to area. So it's a real postcode lottery out there. So we try and best to help people on a one-to-one basis with that. And this can be anything from sort of obtaining assessments for, better support for people to maintain independent longer, to looking at their whole sort of care options throughout their journey. And yet we talked a bit about the COVID-19 and what the challenges this has brought about. And it's brought a lot of challenges for people that have just been diagnosed, because they're now sort of stuck in lockdown, don't know how to access professionals that can help them. Appointments are being delayed, support is being delayed. So there's a lot of sort of conversations with that. And then we've had lots of conversations, people which were initially living well with the diagnosis and got used to their situations and had some really good routines in place. But suddenly lockdown has come along and there's the restrictions going on. Groups and activities are shut down. So, this has sort of brought these added challenges. There's also been an awful lot of anxiety about hospitals, admissions to hospitals, and people in care home as well. So we've had some really sort of interesting conversations with people, to do with that. And so we've developed some resources for people going into hospital if they have to go into hospital, but also we've been talking to people about the alternatives of that as well. We've got an amazing comms officer that started with us, Catherine, and we've been working really sort of closely with her to develop some really good resources for people. We realise a lot of things are online now, so she's done some great arts and cultural resources which are really helpful for people in the lockdown. And that can be anything sort of from online opera and concerts to joining Zoom choirs, to Zumba, to yoga, Pilates, whatever. And so really there's quite a variety that we've managed to pull together. And we've also tried to help people with sort of what they can do within the restrictions. So making the most of their daily walks and sort of different alternatives to their exercise, try and get out if they can to enjoy what they've got around them, and really focusing on the mindfulness of smelling the flowers, smelling the cut grass in the park, listening to the sounds of birds. I've got a dog, so like many of you avid dog walkers out there have been out making the most of this, and I'm sorry to say I've actually become a twitcher as well of this in my local park, identifying bird sounds. So it's having an effect on all of us. Also, we're really lucky with the National Brain Appeal. They have been having fantastic storytelling sessions every day with a different author, which is normally an actor, an actress, or somebody quite famous reading something, which I find really entertaining. And Patrick Stewart himself, he's been reading a daily sonnet by Shakespeare. So there really is a lot of alternatives that we've been having. And just before I quickly go, I want to talk about the buddying, which Nick mentioned as well, and Seb mentioned. We have realised that, having a diagnosis or being a carer, being in this situation is socially isolating enough. But when there's further restrictions on and you can't get out, you can't get to see people, this really magnifies the problem. So we've been trying our best to buddy people within our different support groups. We've had some great successes. We've buddied together about 60, 70 people so far, and it's amazing sort of how they've managed to sort of really gel together. They've got WhatsApp groups together, and we've got Zoom groups happening all over the place. So I've been really, really pleased with that, and we really want to sort of extend that out to this group as well and see what we can do going forward. So like I said, please do get in contact with us. We work really closely with the research team and the clinical team. So it is a very much a multidisciplinary approach to us, but sometimes the easiest way is to come through the direct support team. So that's
Absolutely.
sort of it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Nikki. And just as we close, I just emphasize this kind of tailored nature of the support that Nikki's mentioning, one-to-one, big groups like this, but particularly with these small groups, if you would like, if there's a conversation you want to have, if there's a question you want to ask or an issue you want to grapple with, it might be with other members of you just from the fAD support group. It might be an issue which is more wide-ranging, such as living at risk or caring for an older relative or a younger relative with a condition where it doesn't have to be specific. Just let us know those ideas, because we're very happy. Our job basically is to open the door. It was to open the door to physical meetings. At the moment, it's to open the door to virtual meetings and conversations. We're there to be the gatekeepers. It might be a conversation that you want to have facilitated by one of us or co-facilitated by one of us and one of you, or it might be a conversation you want to have by yourself. Just let us know. We'll be sending out the advert for new online support discussions at the beginning of June, and we'd love to have your suggestions for what those should be focusing on. So Nick, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Seb and Nikki. Just to emphasize almost the last point, which is the fAD support group clearly has got a range of different people who are members and interested in very different situations. And we certainly had in previous meetings a desire expressed for people in a similar situation to meet up. So I really just encourage you to please don't feel reticent about suggesting, would this be a good idea for a small group with or without the RDS, but we're there to try and help with that. And it might be that it as Seb said, something which you want in quite a wide forum, or it might be in a very, very small group, and that can be done at different levels. And we clearly see that people who are at risk are in a very different set of questions to somebody, for example, who may be looking after a family member or a relative. And there's a whole range of nuances in between that. So really, this would be one of the few good things to come out of this COVID situation. Is it's forcing us to think about how we can connect people who are miles apart online, and I think that would be great learning for when we move on. So Nikki and Seb, thank you very much. I'm assuming people can hear, and I'm now going to, I'm clearly not Kath Monry, people have realized that out, but I am going to speak to her talk, and she sends her very best wishes to everybody, and apologies that she can't be here. So I'm going to talk to slides that she put together, and she and I worked together on, and I'm gonna, it will inevitably be quite a canter through that, because people are at different levels of interest and expertise here, and I don't want to talk down to people, but equally I don't want to lose other people. So bear with me when I get that pitching the level not quite right. But what I will say is that I think I really just want to a little bit set the scene. We're very happy to take questions in the Q&A session afterwards, but also if there are things that you want to specifically ask Kath or me, then we're very happy to take that offline and answer those questions. If, for example, if they were pertinent just to your personal situation and weren't a question you want to ask generally. And I've been told to remind people that questions should be within the webinar control panel. There's a question section. Hopefully you found that. That's where you can put through your questions. Okay, and I'm behind the scenes, somebody's going to move my slides on for me, so I'd like to move on to the next slide, please. So this is a very complicated slide, and I don't expect you to look through all the different aspects of it, but I put it up because even this is a tremendous reduction in and simplification of what we know about this disease now. And the advances I really feel have been accelerating. And so please don't try and take in all of this slide. It's a cartoon to represent how much more we know about the pathology, the processes that take place in Alzheimer's disease more generally. And it's no exaggeration to say that a study of familial Alzheimer's disease, a study of families that you all know so much about, have been absolutely crucial. And these, the understanding both from histopathology that goes back decades to really more recent remarkable advances in science, are leading the way for what might be potential therapies. So some of that therapy comes back to those therapeutic options, come back to information that was really understood poorly, but first picked up on over 100 years ago by Alzheimer himself, describing this disease, looking down through a microscope and putting together both the clinical and the research. So if you could just next animation, please. Slide, please. Yeah. So this is because I can't point at things and you see me pointing at them because you wouldn't know where I was pointing at. This is just to say that a core hallmark that is amyloid, and we know amyloid is at one of the very early stages of Alzheimer's disease. It is a protein that builds up outside cells, and we see this as the very earliest start of a disease process. Amyloid of itself doesn't seem to cause neurodestruction or damage, but it is the prerequisite. It is the starting point. Some people have referred to this as the trigger or the fuel or the starting process for the damage that that Alzheimer's disease causes. Next slide. And then the other hallmark, and both amyloid and these tau tangles, which are now being illustrated here, hopefully you can see, that's the other partner in crime for amyloid. These amyloid and tau are the two main pathologies that were first recognized over 100 years ago, and these are amyloid plaques and tau tangles. And amyloid refers to the protein substance, and plaque to how it appears under the microscope, and the fact that it's this amorphous lump or plaque within the brain. And these tangles are the tangling up of the brain cells' railway tracks, their communication system, and they become all tangled up. And they're called tau tangles because the protein is tau. Next slide, please. And so the targeting can be either at the moment in terms of our therapies, we're trying to attack these core processes, amyloid and tau. And up until now, that's really where the focus was. And more recently, the focus has been trying to move even further upstream, tackling the gene itself, or the genes that may be contributing, or the gene products. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to step back for a moment and talk about how a therapeutic strategy might work. And if you look towards as I look at it, and hopefully as you look at it, towards the right of this timeline that runs from no pathology through to preclinical, through to MCI, which means mild cognitive impairment, through to dementia, our treatments have historically focused for Alzheimer's disease and for familial Alzheimer's disease at the the far right, at when people are already clinically affected. And we do have, and there's a list of things that can be done at what's called tertiary prevention and treatment. And the bottom bullet point there, it talks about neurotransmitter repletion. And that is essentially the therapies that we have at the moment, the licensed therapies. People may have heard of therapies like donepezil or Aricept. They are basically boosting the brain's neurotransmitters so that even if you've got damage to nerve cells, you can make them function harder. And those are not wonder drugs, they're not cures, but they are a treatment well worth having. Can you move back a moment? So if we go across that slide, in the middle, we see secondary prevention. And what we remember by that is there is evidence from scans or something else that there are changes of Alzheimer's in the brain, but somebody isn't clinically affected. And going even earlier, primary prevention is about starting before even any hallmarks are in the brain. So you can see there's different levels you may need to target. Next slide, please. And the focus of our therapies have up to now been immunotherapies. And this couldn't be a more topical subject at the moment. People probably have heard through the radio and the telly more about immunology and immunotherapy and vaccines and antigen and antibody tests. So passive immunotherapy, which has been the focus of research for the last at least 10 years, has been about getting antibodies the body would naturally make, but actually we're making them artificially in this case, to attack and dissolve, break up either the tau or the amyloid that I just described. And that bizarre looking thing that you see on the right there with their little sort of what looks a bit like something out of Star Trek, those little white bits, they're meant to be a cartoon of the antibody attacking an amyloid plaque or something, and then allowing the brain to break it down. And at the bottom left, you see in yellow a number of unpronounceable names. That's aducanumab, I'll stumble over them, gantenerumab, and solanezumab. They all ended mab, and that is monoclonal antibody. Monoclonal means it's just has got one focus, so it's mono, and one clone, an antibody, something that will attack something. Next slide, please. So people who've been following the field may be aware that one of the most promising treatments, which is a mAb, aducanumab, almost exactly a year ago was halted, which was a real blow to the field and to many of us who've been hoping that this might work. And it was stopped because the trial didn't look like it was producing enough cognitive benefit to make it worthwhile continuing for the whole time, even though it had several thousand people already enrolled. But then, which is most unusual for a treatment trial, a reanalysis of the studies meant that last autumn, the study was reanalyzed and a positive signal. And this really is a remarkable thing for our field. Now, what you can see in those graphs in front of you, you don't have to go into the detail but what you're looking at, there were two studies which they're always given, I don't know why they needed it. It seems to be they have to be given some easy names. So there were two studies in parallel called Emerge and Engage. And that just happens to be the name they were, and they were worldwide studies. So just focus on one of those graphs. So let's say Emerge. Red is placebo. That's the people who were in the trial thinking they might be getting a treatment or not knowing, but they weren't getting an antibody. And then in blue is a low dose, and in green is a high dose of aducanumab. And if the graph is going down, the amount of amyloid in the brain, assessed through brain scans, is being reduced. So if we look at the red line first, that's people not getting any treatment, and their level of amyloid is very slightly increasing. We think actually by the time people are symptomatic, they've already got almost a full load of amyloid in the brain. And these graphs that you're looking at are really historic. This is making a remarkable difference to the amount of amyloid in people's brains. And in some of the cases, in those on the highest dose for the longest time, the amyloid scans were such that they were almost back to normal. That's remarkable. Next slide, please. There were 2 of these antibodies that were trialed in the DIAN-TU. Some of the people in the meeting today will have been part of these trials, and sadly, neither of those met their change cognition. Relatively small numbers of people, but it was safe. And gantenerumab, a bit like aducanumab, as I've shown, showed reduction in amyloid, and it also changed markers of disease activity in a good way. Next slide, please. So DIAN is offering, and our site will too, an open label extension. What that means is people who have been in the study will get treatment if they want to. There won't be a placebo arm, it will be gantenerumab. It'll only be for those who are carriers, and we can come back to this on questions, but so people have to know their status, and so that's a big decision. Next slide, please. Nearly coming to the end, I'll just a couple of minutes more. Also, there are other promising treatments coming along, particularly focusing on tau. So the idea that we'll try and attack the disease from both the amyloid side and the tau side, and the list there includes antibodies and genetic therapies, as well as conventional small molecules. Next slide, please. So I've talked to this group before. Those people have heard me go on about this before will know that I feel very excited by what are called ASOs, or gene silencing. And they can either target the specific gene, and this is so relevant for the families in this meeting, actually knock out the gene that we know causes the disease. That hasn't quite reached clinical studies yet, but work is ongoing fast. What's got a little bit further ahead, just because it was started first, was to be able to target the gene that produces tau. And the first 46 patients have now been tested on that. And that is to not to knock out the gene that causes familial Alzheimer's disease, but to knock out the protein that we think is really important. And this is at an early stage, but it's a space to watch. Next slide, please. So, we jumped over. The slide before was just to say thank you very much to the huge team of people at the DRC, some of the people you'll see here, and the Wilson and others who helped to make these studies possible, but most importantly to all of you who take part in trials. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to hand over to Antoinette O'Connor, who's a clinical research fellow working on biomarkers who many of you will know, and she's going to talk about her work on blood biomarkers. Antoinette.
Great, thanks. What Nick also forgot to mention is I was partly hired for an Irish person's ability to talk quickly, so I can make up time after Nick goes over. So we'll put that to the test now.
That's very, very unfair, and we will make enough time. So I'm sorry if I went on, but don't feel yourself curtailed there, even if you can speak quickly.
But no, joking aside, I have to say that my time in research has been I've been really fortunate that it's coincided with a time of huge progress in the area of blood biomarkers. And next slide. This is really exciting because blood biomarkers have the potential to revolutionize the field of Alzheimer's disease research. Their blood tests are simple, they're cheap, they're non-invasive, and they're easily repeatable. And unlike traditional brain scans or lumbar punctures, they can be done at your local GP surgery or even at home. Thus, a blood test would really potentially broaden access to research, which is a really exciting moment. And this revolution in blood biomarkers started around 3 years ago. Slide, please. And the first test off the mark was neurofilament light. Neurofilament light is a protein that is found within brain cells. When brain cells are injured or damaged, this protein is released into the bloodstream. And 3 years ago, technology was developed that could reliably detect this protein in blood. And this led to some really exciting results being found. And in this slide here, we can see results from the DIAN observational study, which I know some of the attendees today have already participated in and donated blood samples to over the years. And this showed that neurofilament light is elevated in Alzheimer's disease both before and after symptom onset, and appears to track and predict future change. And this is really exciting because it has the potential to be a monitor of treatment response, and also being the advantages over lumbar punctures and PET scans being that it'd be easily repeatable. However, the only slight drawback with neurofilament light is that it's non-specific, so it's elevated in other diseases that affect the brain. So Nick spoke earlier about the hallmark proteins of Alzheimer's disease, so amyloid and tau. And can these be tested for in the blood? Next slide, please. And it's looking like indeed it is possible. This is results from a study conducted by Randy Bateman, who also works in DIAN, from his Washington University study. And it shows that blood tests of amyloid can reliably detect whether somebody has amyloid deposition in their brain, thus showing that maybe amyloid blood tests could be able to replace expensive PET scans. And also, again, we have the advantage of a blood test one could do in your home. Unlikely you could probably do a PET scan in your home. So especially in this era of COVID, we have to think about things that are scalable and more available, and really blood tests are looking like a real game changer. And what about tau? Well, next slide, please. This is work that has been led by Henrik Stettenberg, looking at the protein phospho-tau. And he recently published a paper which shows that plasma phospho-tau is elevated in Alzheimer's disease. And what's really exciting about this work is it appears to be reasonably disease-specific. So you don't see elevations in other causes of dementia, like frontotemporal dementia. But what about familial Alzheimer's disease? Next slide. And this is work that I've been doing. So you'll be glad to know that all those blood tests that I've been greedily taking off you over the years have finally been put to good use. And this shows some really, really exciting results. We found that plasma phospho-tau is elevated in pre-symptomatic and symptomatic familial Alzheimer's disease, with increases as with increasing disease stage. And what's particularly exciting about this is there seems to be very little overlap between the diagnostic groups, suggesting that this really could be a really very good diagnostic test and also a really good staging measure. And this is particularly promising, as Nick spoke earlier. We're moving towards an area where there's an increasing amount of excitement about anti-tau therapies. And if we had a reliable tau blood test, this could be used for screening people, could also be used as a measure of treatment response. So this is, this is a huge game changer for the field. And when I joined the GRC 3 years ago, even, it really wouldn't have been believed that this much progress could have been made in such a short time. And it's really looking now like we can use these blood tests where previously we were reliant on lumbar punctures and brain scans. Next slide, please. Oh, skip. So I just want to close by saying this work would not be possible without all the blood tests and all the time and work you've all contributed towards our research over the years, as well as the contributions of other colleagues. This was a multi-center effort, but the big thanks goes to all of the families and all of the time you've given.
Just before you go, Antoinette, I think that we should do a particular shout out to. I know that you've told me about a number of people in the families who are proper needle phobics and who have still given blood samples, which shows like going above and beyond.
Indeed.
So thank you very much. We now move on, and I just want to underline something that Antoinette said. I have to say that if you'd asked me a few years ago what I thought about the chances of having as a blood test, I would have said it's, blood is a really messy thing. I don't mean that in the sort of horror film way, but it's messy because there's the liver, the kidney, or the CSF or what you get from lumbar punctures is just in contact with the brain. It's very protected. But to be able to detect these proteins in blood is a remarkable step forward, and it really will, I think, accelerate treatment trials, which is what we all want to do. So next up, I'd like to introduce Sophie Leggett, who I've had the privilege of working with and of interacting with in a number of ways. And Sophie has been a great advocate for familial Alzheimer's disease. She's also been very brave about going public about her own situation, and has done some amazing, which you may even see, fundraising efforts. But now she's going to particularly, I think, speak about lockdown. Sophie, over to you. I think we're just trying to get hold of Sophie. So what we might do, just while we sound like the presenters on the radio, when they have trouble in these days of getting hold of somebody, but she may have a connection problem at the moment. So what I'm going to suggest we do is we will move on, and we will come back. I'm sure Sophie will establish her connection in a moment. So I'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is it's great pleasure to introduce Dame Hazel again, who has been a great contributor. Hi, Hazel. Great contributor to enthusiastically bringing the great strength of, I mean, UCL laws, but the lawyers and legal students that she works with to very generously provide support to RDS. And so it's a great pleasure. Thank you very much, Hazel. I'll tell one anecdote, if I may. I was asking about whether or not Hazel might be able to provide. We were talking about another issue about some legal support, and I hope this is not stories out of school, Hazel. But I was asking about other areas of expertise, and I think you said something like about, or it was either you or somebody else that Hazel had appointed most of the High Court judges anyway, so there would be a good sources of information. So she's a great somebody to have on your side if you've got a legal problem. So I won't cross her by cutting her presentation short, but over to you, Hazel.
All right, I won't take too long. It is true that I did spend quite a few years doing appointing judges. Anyway, welcome everybody. Sorry I can't see you, but very pleased to be here. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you about the service that we provide, which is an additional service for that adds on to the very good work that's being done by the support group. So I'm a professor in the Faculty of Laws at UCL, and I direct a Centre for Access to Justice. The purpose of that centre is to provide free advice to people to ensure that they get the critical services and benefits that they're entitled to. And we provide advice to a whole range of people, but we teamed up with Nick and Seb a few years ago because they were getting, through their support groups, they were getting a lot of questions that they felt they couldn't really answer, but raised questions about social welfare legal needs and social welfare rights. And obviously people, when they're dealing with challenging health situations, don't always know what services and benefits they're entitled to. And a service, and actually quite often they don't know where to go to find information about that. And our service can provide help with that. So I just wanted to say briefly what it is that we do and to let you know how you can contact us. So what we provide is what's known as a one-off generalist advice service on a broad range of legal issues. So we cover a broad range of issues to support group members, and that's both for people with the diagnosis and their carers. The service is free of charge. It's open to members to use as many times as they want to. And we used to physically attend support group meetings to help people complete inquiry forms. Of course, at the moment, we can't do that, which is why I'm really glad that we're able to join these sorts of webinars. But a form is available from the team, and we can, if you email me or you email afterwards, we can give you a link to that. Just say briefly what we do. When we get an inquiry, so the point of the inquiry form is for you to tell us what the issue is that you think we might be able to help with. We'll review that. It helps us to work out whether or not we can help you. And we generally very much hope that we can. We always try to assist wherever possible, but if your matter is particularly urgent or complex, we might sometimes have to refer you on someone else, but at least we're a first place to come to, and we're easy to access. Once you've told us what the issue is, we'll arrange an appointment. Now, these used to be either face-to-face or Skype or telephone. At the moment, we can't do them face-to-face because our building has been closed down. And so all of the advice that we give is now remote, either advice by email, or we'll do it over the telephone, or we'll do it using Skype or some other software, whatever you prefer. We've got a team of volunteer students who research each query, and they prepare advice ready for the appointment, but the appointment will be with a member of our legal staff from our integrated legal advice clinic. Then after you've had the appointment and you've had the advice, we'll send a letter confirming what we discussed and then addressing any follow-up questions that you might have that arise during the appointment. I think that's really important because sometimes when you have an appointment, it's quite difficult to kind of take in all of the information you're being given. And so that follow-up is really helpful. So just to remember that we're a free service. We don't provide ongoing legal representation or specialist advice. So if somebody needed, for example, to go to a tribunal or court hearing or something, generally not the case, but if that were the case, we would probably have to refer you on someone else, but we have good connections with people who can help us. And as I said, if you've got an issue, then please do just get in touch with us, fill in our inquiry form, and we will get back to you. The kinds of issues that we deal with is not just related to COVID. We deal with a wide range of issues. The kinds of things that people raise with us, sometimes people think, I don't think my problem is a legal problem, because that's not how people define difficulty. They know they've got a difficulty. They don't necessarily think that it might have a legal solution. The kinds of things that people have asked us about in the past are things like implementing using powers of attorney, thinking about advanced directives, eligibility and rules for social care and services provided by local authorities, eligibility rules about NHS continuing health care, eligibility for disability benefits and other state financial support, and very importantly, employment rights as well. So those are some of the common issues that people have raised with us. And of course, it's very important. We're very conscious of the fact that many matters need to be sorted out while people have capacity. In legal terms, things need to be sorted out while people have capacity. So I always say with problems for which there are legal solutions, the earlier you act, the more likely you are to be able to solve the thing, sort the thing out. And that's particularly true if there may be issues of capacity arising. So if you think you might have a problem for which we might be able to provide help, please do feel free to get in touch, fill in one of our inquiry forms, and then we'll arrange an appointment for you to discuss your specific issue. I know there's a question and answer session later on, and I just want to make clear now that although I might be able to give kind of broad general guidance on certain things, I couldn't possibly give individual advice in this kind of context. But the advice that we give through the advice clinic is very much tailored to your specific issue, and it's to help you resolve the problem about which you are concerned. So with that, I think I'll leave it there. I've said enough about what we do, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer those later on.
Great, thank you very much, Hazel. I just want to emphasize what Hazel was saying, in that they have remarkable skills, and working as a clinician with people with cognitive problems, but also seeing the things that come up with people who are at risk of familial Alzheimer's disease or live in families with familial Alzheimer's disease. The range of problems is just amazing. So, and I've often felt out of my depth advising people, and so it's great to have real experts to help here. And I think alongside this, and at the risk of, I hope Hazel doesn't mind me saying that, I think we, at so many different levels, RDS, but the fAD support group in particular, has an educational role. we need to educate GPs who often will say, oh, well, somebody's too young to have Alzheimer's disease. But we also need, in these legal side of things, we need to educate judges and solicitors. We've had people with cognitive problems who have been wrongly, because they behaved inappropriately or behaved oddly, have actually fallen the wrong side of law, and they should not, absolutely should not have been dealt with in that way. And so I think it's great to have Hazel and her team to help us here. I don't know, Hazel, whether you wanted to comment on that.
I just comment on both of those points. First of all, I completely agree with you that quite often health professionals are asked questions, the answers to which they simply don't know, and that people bring that quite naturally, quite often raise those questions with them. And one of the things that I'm doing within UCL is trying to educate some of our MBBS students to raise their levels of consciousness about the extent to which people might be raising issues for which people require legal advice, and to try and help them to see what practical things they can do to support them. And the other point to make, which actually did come up, I think, the last time we had one of these webinars, about whether judges do understand enough about how different types of behaviour need to be interpreted depending on people's conditions. And I think that judges do get training on that, but I think that there is always scope for, and the trouble is that judges have to be trained on a wide range of issues, but they are required to take into account particular needs of people and to be sensitized, I think, to different kinds of behavior, particularly in highly stressful situations. I mean, for anybody, being in a situation where you're in front of a judge is actually quite stressful, and it makes everyone behave differently than they would if they were in their own sitting room. But I do think that there is an issue here about, there's always an issue about how we can improve the education of judges. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much time.
No. I think it's really important we said that. And one of the things, while you're still there, is I'd be really grateful for people on this call. They'll even have got questions, but we'd also like to hear your stories, because one of the things that Seb spoke about this, it's a bit of a, it's a sort of, I hope it's not a fantasy or a pipe dream, but it's something that we all as a group really want to do, which is to create this first ever world centre for rare dementias, in particular to provide support for groups like the fAD support group, but also education is central to that. And so we've recognized, and we keep hearing these stories that, you know, it's not just GPs that need education, it's opticians, it's judges, it's the police. And so your stories of difficult issues you've come up with, even if you sorted them, we'd be really grateful to hear those, as well as the questions, because you might be one of many people facing that same thing, or you might be able to help us when we do a session for, I don't know whether it's high court judges or whatever, or magistrates or whatever it is that we need to do. That would be really great to hear your stories.
Concrete examples, real life concrete examples of the kind of things that stick in the minds of people, and it stays with them when they're dealing with people later on. So absolutely agree. If people can send those in, that would be fantastic.
As Hazel said, just that real life anecdote can be really much more powerful than something that's very dry. Say you must take into account that people may behave differently if they have more trouble. I mean, to give you one example, we had somebody leaving clinic once who was almost assaulted and then almost arrested just because they didn't recognize that it was inappropriate on a station to start talking to somebody else's child, and because they weren't able to explain themselves so well, they almost ended up in jail. And that would have been such a travesty, and there was no malice or anything. It was just not reading the situation right, which can easily happen. Okay, well, with that, thank you very much, Hazel. You're going to join us on a panel, which I think we're going to go to now, and Sophie Leggett will join us when she can, if she can. So I'm going to ask to come it's much quicker than asking people to come up to a podium or anything, because people just click on their, hopefully can click on their cameras. So I've got Antoinette, hopefully you can see, Helen, Seb, and Nikki. And I think our master of ceremonies, you'll have to adopt some sort of media persona, Seb, celebrity squares for people who are old enough for that, but probably not that many, is going to sort of field the questions and hand them out to people a little bit, and we'll try and answer them. So please do send your questions in. We'll try and be brief so we can get through as many questions as possible. Over to you, Seb. What would you like to start with?
Well, thank you. I'd first like to say, I think describing me as master of ceremonies when you've got lockdown hair like mine is extremely generous, but there we go. So thank you very much for everyone who sent in questions already. Please do feel free as we go through the next 40 minutes or so to send in any questions or comments you like. They don't have to be about any particular topic, and like Nick said, we'd be very grateful for you just to make your comments about stories, experiences, particularly over the past few weeks. Sophie was hoping to share some of her experiences of living in lockdown, and if you would like to, given that she can't currently join us, then that'd be great. I thought I'd start with a question we've had to throw perhaps initially to Nick and Antoinette, which was about the state of trials. The question asked particularly in relation to gene silencing, how those trials are going, but particularly the question was about how things have potentially stopped because of COVID, what's ongoing and what's had to be paused. So Nick and Antoinette, I wondered if you could comment on that.
Well, shall I start with that, and then Antoinette, you can come in. So the question, one of the questions is around what's happened to trials, and well, this applies more widely than just to gene silencing with COVID. The natural history studies, the studies where we don't give people, we're not giving people a treatment, have been paused. But some of the treatment trials where it would be really disastrous if somebody halfway through a treatment trial could no longer get their treatment. Some of those have continued, admittedly under quite difficult circumstances. So I'm pleased to say that the clinical studies, thanks to, you know, amazingly, people talk about people on the front line, but people carrying on these research studies are very much on the front line. So that has carried on, and of course the basic science work has been paused here in London at the peak of COVID, but is carrying on in laboratories around the world. And we are just starting to get the labs going back. It's going to be with one-way systems and PPE and shifts, but they're getting going.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add. I think Nick has covered where we're at.
Okay, thank you. That's great. So I'm sure we'll come back to the issue of trials, treatments, and current status of research in fAD soon. But for the moment, I wondered if we could jump on to a rather different question, perhaps to throw out towards Nikki, Helen, and Hazel for any comments, which is particularly someone asking about the forms of support that potentially could be provided to help younger people continue to engage with meaningful activities in the community. I think the questioner was particularly asking or throwing out the possibility or wish for there to be some sort of scheme which involved people having almost a personal assistant to help guide and connect. And so I suppose it reminded me something of the dementia support worker schemes that have operated in some parts of the country. But the question is really asking what schemes are there that would be helpful for those people with early onset Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia, young onset dementia, that could help them to, that aren't necessarily just drawing on those services which are geared to older people. Nikki, could you care to comment?
Yes, certainly. We've seen before in the past the side-by-side service by the Alzheimer Society, which is a befriending service, and it is predominantly there to support people to carry on with their hobbies. and they're going to sort of activity clubs, things like that, allow them to do that. Obviously with COVID, all these have been stopped at the moment, and this is very much the case with lots of other services as well, because of social distancing. I think as we see sort of a relaxation of going out to meet one-to-one with people, we might see this actually starting again at some point, but at the moment the guidance isn't there. You don't have to go through these community services and voluntary services for that, because they are very few and far between. I mean, for example, the Age UK do one, but you have to be over the age of 65 and you have to live on your own. So there's lots of restrictions and sort of with criteria for the eligibility for these things. Local community services, because they vary so much from postcode lottery, from area to area, it's a good idea to have a look at your carer centre to see if they have any suggestions. Privately, though, these can be arranged through care agencies. Care agencies are not just there to provide personal care and to do shopping and help around the home. They are there to provide personal assistance. So they will provide personal assistance to do absolutely anything, really, to take somebody to the golf club, go and watch a football match, to go and do their daily shopping, to go and have a cup of coffee, with lots of different things. Again, the care agencies are still doing work at the moment. There are special measures in place for that. So it is, we would be more than happy to help people if they want to contact us, and we could put them in contact with local care agencies to arrange this, or to see when they can start up again. Helen, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you've covered it all, if you know. Thank you.
I've been talking too much.
No, in a good way. In a good way, you covered it.
Hazel, I saw you.
That there are organisations like Youth Access that are geared to services for younger people. But it occurs to me as you're speaking that many GP practices have social prescribing link workers, and there is a National Association of Social Prescribing Link Workers, and they are still working remotely, even though everything they're doing is remote. And the link workers are linked with community services designed to provide a range of non-medical activities and support for people dealing with a range of issues. And obviously what's available in a local area will depend on the community services in that area, the voluntary services in that area. But actually social prescribing link workers are an amazing resource. I happen to be linked in with them because one of the things I always tell them to do is to, where people are having trouble with finances or something, to make sure that they link them up with social welfare legal services. But I see a lot of the things that, because I'm linked up with them, I see a lot of the things that they're doing, the range of activities that they can link people with. And they do, the point about a link worker is that they are designed to meet the needs of the individual, to look at what it is an individual needs and what kind of service is available locally that would be helpful. And they are continuing to do that through lockdown, even through remote support. So I would just try to put that on your radar, the link workers collaboration. I'll send you the details, but anyway, that I think is actually a very good resource.
Thank you, Nick. I think I may have seen your hand go up at one point, or it may have just been a sort of flinch or something. I'm not sure.
I'll let you get on to another question.
Okay, I would just wanted to link that last question, I suppose, to a comment really that's come in, a statement of fact, which I think many of us would agree with, from one of the members on the meeting, who said that social services, local voluntary organisations and NHS staff need educating about these conditions. So I think, as you can see from the nodding heads on the screen, that's a view which we would certainly sympathise with. I suppose before I perhaps hand over a little bit to Nikki to talk about the link between support and education, I guess a couple of relevant facts as far as we're concerned at RDS in recognising the role that we play as in trying to sort of connect people. And I think the education idea, we're really pleased that for the first time ever, Chris Hardy has just been appointed as a part-time education officer for rare dementia support, with the aim to try to equip professionals, not just through standard traditional training days where you try and get 100 GPs or 50 occupational therapists in a room to train them, but where we can create resources which try to equip people who have fantastically relevant skills, but perhaps haven't worked with someone with fAD or another rarer dementia before, and whereby we link them up with another professional from the same tradition. Perhaps let's take the example of speech therapists who may have had loads of experience of working with people who have language problems or aphasia after a stroke, but never perhaps have come across it in someone with a young onset dementia. And we've got now a dedicated speech and language therapist attached to RDS called Anna Volkmer, and she is forming this network where she can do one-to-one kind of mentoring almost with other speech language therapists around the country, so that when they get a referral for someone who has a language related dementia, they don't just freak out and think, oh, I don't know what to do in this situation, I've never met anyone with this condition. She can talk them through how to use, tweak, and slightly change and adapt the skills, the absolutely relevant skills they do have, and certainly the local knowledge, to apply those, to translate them, if you like, into something which is actually useful for someone with dementia. And Nikki, I was going to pass over to you to say a little bit about that's one of our hopes for the new Admiral Nurse as well, that we'll be able to tap into not just their specific individual expertise, but that wider network of Admiral Nurses, 270, I think, Admiral Nurses around the country, that local knowledge and the connections they have with local social services and voluntary organisations.
Yeah, it's been great actually. One thing I do want to add is we do realise there is a problem out there. However, I'm really pleased that we are seeing a huge increase of health professionals signing up to our membership and reaching out to us. It's been absolutely incredible over the last few months. I actually think we have half of, well, over half, probably most of NHS Merseyside now as members, because we've just continually seen them signing up to us and asking for resources. It is great news that we've got Chris on board to do work as the education officer, and even already this week we've been doing some work, myself, Chris and Anna. For example, I had a phone call from a lady who runs a care agency up in Cheshire. They have new client, a lady they're going to be doing some work with that has PPA. She was very truthful. She said, I've never heard of PPA, but I really need to learn about it, and I really need to learn fast. So I've been working already with Chris about getting some resources to them, some resource packs, and also with Anna. So Anna is actually going to link with them and do some work as the SLT. So already sort of little things like that are tweaking as well. Also in the last couple of weeks, we've helped with our navigation of getting somebody the correct diagnosis for PCA. The lady is in a care home. The daughter is really quite concerned that the care home aren't able to meet her needs, need some education. Again, I've been speaking to the manager of that care home this morning and supplied them with lots of resources, and I've got a phone call arranged for next week. So it is looking into those areas in networking. And like Seb said, we are getting an Admiral Nurse, and there's lots of Admiral Nurses out there in the community, which our Admiral Nurse can do what they can do within RDS, and then connect with those Admiral Nurses in the community. But it is all about our links with the community and out there, and educating them to be able to support people with a rare dementia better.
Absolutely, and I'd also say that Roberta McGee-Jackson, who's our regional facilitator to our regional RDS groups, also does a fantastic job linking in with the different communities, some small, some medium-sized, some large, in different places around the UK, where that local expertise often exists as to, oh, who is the best dentist, or who is the solicitor locally who understands something about these issues, or which one of the other members of the regional group has had a good connection with and who felt that professional just got it, so that we can share that expertise. And so that's another really key role that Roberta plays. One other thing I just briefly wanted to touch on is the role that you can play in this education. I'm wary always of asking those of you who already have so many challenges and pressures to contribute further of your time. And also I'm painfully aware that what was in RDS a relatively small organisation, it may be that in the past we've put call outs for help or advice or people to share stories, and maybe haven't been able to action those or work with your kind offers of help in the way or as fast as we would have wanted to. One of the other benefits to, for example, having someone like Catherine on board as a communications officer and a more broad-based and established team is we really do hope that we will be able to pick up on your good ideas and your important stories faster and more effectively than we have done previously. And certainly the experiences you've had, good or bad, as Nick referred to at the beginning, of services, of particular healthcare professionals, of problems you faced or solutions you found are really, really, really helpful to other people. And certainly it's by far and away the most your voices are by far and away the most potent tools we have for doing that education role, for changing people's minds. It's much, no disrespect to Nick, he's a fantastic communicator, but for all of us professionals, nothing hits home more than someone saying what difference another professional understanding a condition made to them as someone who lives with it, compared to one of us kind of preaching to our colleagues. Right, in the interest of time, let's move on. Perhaps a little bit back more towards research. One question that we have had, it relates to, it's quite a specific question to trial of gantenerumab, and asking about if you applied for that trial but were refused entry to, if an interest in the gantenerumab trial, and asking whether if you had been refused entry to DIAN-TU because of your level of cognitive abilities, whether that would necessarily be an issue with the gantenerumab trial. And also, I suppose, a slightly broader question as well, asking if there is a simple resume of the existing protocols. I assume this means for trials and other research opportunities related to fAD. So I wondered, Nick, Antoinette and Helen, if I could perhaps throw those questions to you.
Yeah, shall I start on the gantenerumab question, which everybody reasonably calls Gant because you stumble over it less. The short answer to that question is no. It is only designed for those people who were in the treatment trial and had the therapy. And that's common in treatment trials, what's called an open label extension. Open label meaning that you're no longer either given placebo or treatment. The label is open. What you're getting is known. You will be getting Gant. That is only going to be given to those people who have already been on the study, and that is pretty standard for clinical trials, that you carry on in extension phase, because people who may have had benefit but it had not come through yet would benefit by it being continued. There's not a plan that somebody who did not go into the trial to get a therapy like gantenerumab until it's in a separate research study or it gets licensed. I mean, the thing that we're all waiting for is for one of these therapies to get licensed, and then we can offer treatments. I don't know whether, Seb, you wanted me to pick up on, there was a question about aducanumab, and do you want me to take that since it's relevant to being licensed? So aducanumab, the question, let's just read out the question so that it's much nicer when people can ask them from the audience, but I can read it out. The question was essentially around if you what had been happened in terms of licensing for aducanumab. So this was a trial that was paused and then restarted, and an application has gone to the so the question is, do you know what happened to the aducanumab license application? When will it be available in the UK? So the Food and Drug Administration in the US, which is the main licensing authority, and there's a European and a UK equivalent, have asked for further studies, and that's not a surprise. When will it be available in the UK will be very dependent upon what those studies, and I think the minimum will be another year, and it may seem to people waiting that that's in terminal state of one delay after another, but to get to this stage where the FDA was even considering a license is somewhere where we've not been before. So it is very hopeful, but it's not tomorrow.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And just on the point about the easiest way for people who are interested in partaking in research to understand the kind of range of different projects available? What would be the advice there, or what's the best source of information?
Okay, so I'll start, and Antoinette and Helen can chip in. Well, some of the details are on our website, but I think the easiest thing to do, it's so specialist. If you're in a family with familial Alzheimer's disease, there are two options open to you. Essentially, a treatment trial focused on familial Alzheimer's, and that will cover the whole range in pretty soon, which will be primary prevention. So some of the studies that are being planned will be taking people as young as 18, who may be 20 years before onset. That's planned at the moment, through to people who are at risk but nearer to their expected age at onset, and including people who are symptomatic. But in addition to that, just for symptomatic people, there are, so people who already have some cognitive decline, there are broader trials, some of which allow people who are younger than their convention to go into that trial. So the short answer would be contact us, and people can talk through, because it will differ depending upon your own personal situation. And Helen, Antoinette, myself would all be, if it's familial Alzheimer's disease, well willing to take that email or contact.
Yeah, I just want to echo that and say, I think the easiest thing is if you get in touch with one of us and we can talk you through the research options and kind of the umbrella of things that are available. And they do extend from trials, like Nick has explained, to observational research, which a lot of you have contributed so much to over the years. And within those, there's different studies with a different array of commitment, from, you know, a simple blood test once off, which could even maybe done at your home, to, you know, multiple day study visits, depending on what's right for you at that time. Helen, if you want to add anything.
No, I suppose just to echo that again, yes, I'd be very happy to talk to people, and I completely see that as being the best way to navigate what can appear quite a complex set of choices or situation.
Helen, I wonder whether you might mention, sorry to cut across you, Seb, I wonder whether you might mention the fact that within your role is something that we haven't been able to do for a long time, which is to take research to people's homes. You know, obviously not bring a whole PET scanner with you, but
yeah, absolutely. So I think that's quite an exciting part of this role, such that, you know, if people aren't able to come in and see us at the London site, then I will be able to go out at some point in the future and go and see them at home. And that can include, you know, taking part in aspects of research that may need something like a blood sample, or perhaps a skin biopsy, or some questionnaires. So some of the observational, I suppose, parts of research there that we can do at home, which may make it more accessible. Yeah, so that's an exciting
and an opportunity for people to talk about research with you as a family, if they want to go on their own, but or if sometimes people want to have a discussion, understandably, as a group, because it may have, you know, the implications of a study may be important for other family members.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's perhaps particularly true of new families or people that haven't had so much contact with us. Perhaps the thought of coming down for a visit may be a little daunting, and it can be a nice opportunity to explore those early steps at home. And like you say, Nick, to have you know, multiple family members there and kind of navigate what they may be interested in collectively. And yes, that invitation is equally open to families that we are engaging with, if it may be of benefit.
Great, thank you very much. That's really helpful. I'd like to change tack, if I may, a little bit now. A really important question, and with I think we would rightly take something of a challenge within this question about whether there are any services for teenagers of families living with inherited Alzheimer's disease. The questioner says there used to be a camp or something, or a way for them to get involved in research if they're under the age of 18. And I suppose that's an issue, the issue about supporting children of people with a young onset form of dementia who may or may not themselves be at risk of that condition, is something that, Nikki, we've touched on recently in collaboration with Kath and also with Claire and Livy about how we can best support people under the age of 18. If you'd like, I wondered if you might like to comment a little bit about what we can offer currently and our intention to involve other people with particular expertise in working with younger people living with or at risk of a chronic condition.
Yes, like Seb said, I've just really started talks with Kath and noticed this, this is a huge area which there's such a big gap of service provision in that. So we've just started looking at resources, which there are services available. It's sort of local sort of carer centres and through Mind, young carers, all these different sort of operations to see what they are offering, which doesn't seem to be very much at the moment, and certainly nothing that's really sort of tuned into the problems that we are seeing. We are supporting some parents with their children, especially sort of teenage children, sort of being involved at the moment, and we're just beginning to learn from that. So I think sort of with the direct support team, with it just growing over the last year, we're sort of building our blocks to be able to provide a service. So it's more of a case of watch this space at the moment. We've got another meeting with Kath, hopefully next week, as she's feeling much better, and we'll be able to develop some services to sort of push this on. But I said at the moment, it has been just a bit of a one-to-one service with people, with teenagers, according to what age they are, sometimes with their parents involved, and having a look at what local services there are there. But as I said, it is a huge gap that we do want to fill, but we want to be able to sort of put the right equipment in there to fill that.
Yeah, and I think it's a good example of where, I suppose I made the analogy in terms of specialist services and advice to speech and language therapy earlier, and I think I would regard this as an area in which it's important that RDS are gradually developing experience at making partnerships with people who really do have the specific skills that we need, where we don't feel as a team that we currently have enough expertise or knowledge in a particular area, and someone with a sort of clinical psychology background who's used to working in child and adolescent mental health services would be really beneficial here. And so that's a really great point, a great question, and exactly the kind of that drives and accelerates us to try and keep up thinking of service improvements and ways to support people better or more fulsomely. Another question, well, one comment I just wanted to raise is that one of the members in the meeting has very kindly said that they would like to be involved in one of these fAD small group discussions. And so I think it is just worth us reiterating the keenness that some people have to be involved in one of those kind of conversations. And I just stress that there's no obligation for that to be a long-running commitment. For some of the small groups we've run so far are one-offs. Some of them decide to meet longer term as a group. Others splinter out into kind of one-on-one buddying relationships, which are whatever is helpful to people is what we're keen to support. So there's no obligation or set format for these things. So if you'd like to give it a whirl, please do let Claire, Livy or Nikki know, either through the question box here or through contact at Rare Dementia Support, and we'll be happy to try and set one of those up. Antoinette and Helen, I wondered if I could ask you to comment on a question about whether there is any work being done to catch people coming out of the diagnosis room with the precise and tailored information that they need to help kind of filter things out that are not relevant. And I suppose that applies not just to the clinics at Queen Square, but of course to anyone across the UK who might be being diagnosed with one of these conditions. We're certainly, I know Nick has raised before the enormous geographic variability in where such diagnoses are made, which raises concerns about is there really no one? Are there really no families living in that particular area of the country who have FAD, or is it just that these conditions are going unrecognised or mistaken for something else? So yeah, what are we doing to catch people and give them the right information at the right time?
So if I could, oh, sorry, go on.
No,
go on, Antoinette. No, I was just going to say, I think that will, there, you know, as you've said, there is clearly a need there and something we've recognised, and I think increasingly part of my role may be around looking to improve those networks that we have with people geographically, services not geographically near to us. Certainly in terms of people that are known to us, of course, that's a lot easier to try and establish need and offer support post-diagnosis. But I still think that is a work in progress, but it is something that, again, I've been working on with the clinical team as well. And Antoinette, what were you going to?
I'd echo what Helen said, and yeah, there is definitely variability, having come from training in Ireland and having seen services where we were considerably more limited than the time we have in Queen Square. And I think really fortunate with the cognitive clinic in Queen Square and that we have excellent support nurses, and Helen is there also to specifically navigate routes. But we would be very happy to see anyone with familial Alzheimer's disease in our cognitive clinic, and anyone can be referred. And again, that isn't possible for people. We are trying to increase outreach work, and we're very happy to speak to anyone individually. And I think that, that question makes a really important point about it being the right time. And sometimes, at the first visit, it isn't always, you may not feel that in the right place to talk about research, but the door is always open, and we're very happy to talk to people at any time about what we can help and support them with.
Nick, and then I was going to just ask Nikki if she had anything she wants to add about the kind of critical nature of providing not just what support you provide or information, but about when you provide it, the getting it to things at the time. But Nick first. I
just wanted to feed back to comments that I've had. One, which was 20 years or so ago when I first started getting involved in this, which shows about this importance. I mean, whoever asked that question is absolutely right. Somebody was referred to me for a second opinion, and they said, well, we got a diagnosis that we got this in our family, but we would like some more information. They were very uncomplaining, but I asked them what they'd been told before by the doctor that had seen them, and they'd said, well, you're going to get what your dad had, there's nothing more I can tell you. And I just think that is just such a awful indictment of approach that I hope is happening less now in medicine, which is very paternalistic, get you out of the door and let's, next come in. And then the other thing I wanted to say, which is slightly more positive comment, which somebody has commented on, which is around services, which this catching is also important for, which is I did not even know what I should be asking for. And I think that's so important, whether it's legal or whether it is benefits or whether it's medical or whether it's research, to almost ask the question, what questions should I be asking? And I think that's great advice in any of these situations. And I think I would put that out to people on this. Think about asking the question, what questions should I be asking?
Can I just say something on that one of the things that I feel really strongly about is that there are so many conditions where I think that this kind of thing needs somehow to get into the care pathway, that it needs to be a standard part of the care pathway. So, for example, one of the best examples I know is Macmillan, that where someone is given a cancer diagnosis, part of their care pathway is that they are referred to Macmillan for advice on finances, on employment rights, and on things like that, because people don't know what they don't know, and you don't know what questions you should be asking, and someone needs to raise those issues with you, or at least say, have you thought about some of these things? And that's why the point that you made earlier, I think it was Nick, that education is a huge part of all of this. It's education for healthcare professionals, all of the professions and services that people are going to come into contact with.
Thanks. And if I can just sort of add, it really is sort of that timely information as well, and working with people to see what they need at that time. I had a very interesting conversation with a lady a few weeks ago who wanted lots of information for her husband for his diagnosis, but she was going to take that because he wasn't at all interested in it and she didn't want to burden him with that. I didn't tell her that I'd actually had a conversation with him 2 weeks beforehand, and he'd actually wanted all the information himself and didn't want to burden his wife with that. So it was very interesting sort of how their different timescales were working, but not quite sort of aligned. But it is a case, we do spend a lot of time with people going back and forward and getting cues from them, and actually sort of just giving them, showing them the choices that are out there and the options, and like you said, Hazel, the questions that they really do need to ask, because we did a session recently on knowing your health professionals, and you know, the participants that were there were really surprised that all these different health professionals could be of use and could be really helpful for them. And that they were surprised that there was a really nice lady at Age UK that could help them with their form filling. And I said, well, yeah, that's their job. They get paid for that. She wasn't doing it because she was a nice lady and it was her favour. It was the job. But, you know, people are just not aware of the services and how to access them, and really what they are not just entitled to, but what a great benefit this would be for their lives.
Thank you, Nikki. That's really helpful. As we draw the Q&A gently to a close, and I return to Nick, I've just got one last comment and one last question. The comment comes from a member who says that support for early onset dementia can come from unexpected places. There are a couple of charities in Scotland that started as alcohol charities, then expanded to drug addiction work, and then to mental health. And because of that history, they are great at dealing with families and children. So their services for people with young onset dementia are so different to those coming from charities that are focused on dementia for a long time. I think that's a really important comment, and I think reflects what we all feel, that it's experience of wider life, given how broad-reaching, wide-ranging the impacts of dementia can be: psychological, personal, physical, financial, social, employment-wise, in so many different ways. This is clearly not just a medical condition, as you also well know. Last question I was just going to come to was quite specifically about the gene silencing trial, and whether those involved in that gene silencing trial will be able to take part in other trials if and when treatments start, or the question is, does this depend on the level of cognitive decline? So I wondered, Nick or Antoinette, if you'd like to tackle that one.
Why did I start? So typically with trials, people will only want somebody to be on that treatment trial. So the reason for that is you want to be able to work out whether or not the treatment is having an effect. So they also, for example, if somebody is already clinically affected and would be taking something like donepezil, usually you have to be stable on the donepezil so that you don't get an effect of coming off or on another treatment that would obscure the effect of the treatment trial. So if you were involved in a gene silencing trial, would you be able to take part in the trials if and when treatment starts, to depend on the level of cognitive decline? The answer is that the different trials target different levels. So some trials will only focus on people very mildly affected or not affected at all, and some will target people who are already have got some decline. And they usually don't want to mix them. They usually want to try and look for one group. Do I think, if behind the question is, do I think gene silencing will be of value early, before symptoms, and also of value after symptoms? I think yes. Where it will be most effective and where we will first get an answer, that I don't know. But I think it will be of value throughout the disease course. Some people think it's going to be most valuable before symptoms, but I don't think we know yet.
Sorry, I'm muting myself. Thought I'd get through it without making that blunder, but no, tripped up at the end. We've had a cheeky last question from one panelist to another, which is, not sure it's strictly by the rules, but I think we'll allow it, which was a question for Hazel about what the most common question is in legal terms that you get asked or what is the advice that all of us in families should take if we are in a family where one or more of us is living with a dementia or is facing the prospect of this diagnosis? Nice easy question, just to close up the question.
I don't want to say what the most common ones. I mean, a lot of the questions that we get are to do with lasting powers of attorney, people worried about things to do with declining capacity and wanting to organise their affairs. So we have issues to do with capacity. Those people who are in work are concerned about employment, what their employment rights are, and what responsibilities their employers have towards them. A lot of the other issues are to do with services, with community, with what benefits am I entitled to? You know, people who don't have any experience of having to think about benefits, they start to think about that. What kind of support services are there available for people who are caring for people with a diagnosis and those kinds of things? I mean, there's a very wide range of issues. And in this particular area, and I'm not now talking on the basis of specific requests that we've had, but because of work that I've done in other fields where there is a genetic component, there are concerns that people have about what the implication, what the legal implications are and insurance implications could be of being tested or not being tested. And so there are legal implications. I mean, there are all of the kind of emotional and social questions around that, but there are also questions about legal implications. And those are not easy questions to answer. There's no general advice I can give on that, but if people have those kinds of concerns, those are the sort of things that I think it's perfectly reasonable and right to raise, because I think sometimes it can raise some kinds of issues. You know, it raises ethical issues, but it also can raise legal issues.
Thank you, Hazel, and it's just so reassuring to all of us, I think, that you and your legal advice service are there to help people tackle these issues.
The answers are not always in my head, but we don't know, we'll find someone who does, we'll phone a friend.
A willingness to find an answer, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. So as we draw the Q&A to a close and I hand back to Nick, I think the only general comment I wanted to make, which we perhaps make it most, or should make at most meetings, is of course inherent in all of these questions is a wide variety. Some of these are questions and comments about the science and the research and what can be done and looking to the future. Some of them are very practical, financial, legal, service-related questions about the here and now. Some of the sentiments voiced are also very personal and emotional. And of course, we know that people come to support group meetings looking for different things. Some people don't want to open the door to how they're feeling about the situation. They want to concentrate on what practically can be done. Other people, maybe the opposite, or a mixture of those things. So whatever it was that you came to this meeting hoping for, to seek answers for, please take away what's been useful and leave anything that hasn't been. And it's just a final encouragement always, now, tomorrow, anytime, please to pick up the phone or drop an email to the direct support team, who will always be there to try and offer what support they can, or to find someone else who can help you. So thank you for your questions and comments today, and I'd just like to hand back to Nick.
Thank you, Seb, and thank you the rest of the panel. There's just a couple of things I wanted to say to wrap up, really. One is around the power of this group, the power of you, the members, and not to underestimate that. And I think that you can feel very disempowered. I think that's particularly the case if people are trying to support other people in their family for whatever reason, whether it's familial Alzheimer's disease, and feeling like it's, you know, I've got more than enough on my plate. But I was very struck by meeting some years ago one of the early AIDS HIV activists, and talking about trying to get at that stage all familial Alzheimer's disease was excluded from trials. And the reason, and the drug companies just said, well, they've got something unusual and they're too young, so we'll exclude them from trials. And I was talking about this, And he said, well, and I said I'd been contacting the companies and saying, you know, these are really motivated people. They're exactly the people you want in trials. They're young, they're healthy, they've seen what's happened in their families, they want to do something. And hitting my head against a brick wall. And he said to me, well, all you need to do is get the families involved. They're the powerful people. That's what happened in HIV. The people went, particularly in the States, and just sat outside senators or congressmen's doors and said, this is a problem, you're not dealing with it. So you're more powerful than you think. And the fact that there are treatment trials, the fact that there is a Diane study, the fact that there are all these things that companies are focusing on fAD is a tribute to you and to the activists amongst yourself, for those you can. So I'd like to encourage you to recognize your power in a time of great disempowerment, and to recognize how much you can influence policy, sometimes through media or sometimes through direct activism. I don't think Sir Tom, as I think he's meant to be called now, would have recognized how much of an impact just walking around your garden with a Zimmer frame might be. But we've also seen how policy has had U-turns on the government, just because the people affected at the front line have said, this, hear my personal story, and that is really, really powerful. We focused a lot today on treatment trials and mutual support, and that's of course really central to RDS and to the fAD support group. But it also should be for you, with each other's help and our help, to recognize your power and your ability to influence policy, whether it's changing pharmaceutical companies. There have been questions about why aren't some people eligible, or if they've got too much cognitive decline, or changing the education of medical students, as Hazel Gann said, or changing how magistrates deal with people who might not be best placed to argue their own case. So I'd like to say, take the power that you have and be empowered if you can. And if we can help you with that, we would very much like to do that. I think we are at a time of great change in familial Alzheimer's disease. I hope that we're on the cusp of much better things. It feels like that to me, but then I'm an eternal optimist. So let's hope that we start getting some of these treatment trials coming through and really modifying. And as soon as we get modification, it'll be prevention. That will follow rapidly after that. So I think I'm told I need to mention that there will be, please give us a survey. This is a new world for us. For me, I don't know whether there's anybody listening. It might just be me and maybe some mean trick that RDS have played on me, that I've spent this time talking to a screen, and there'll be some joke afterwards at my expense. But I hope there are people listening, and if it is, please feedback on a survey so I know that somebody did listen. That'll appear after the webinar. You need to help us make this better. Help us with your stories, help us with your questions, help us with forming small groups that you can connect with people like you. You may have more answers than you think you have, even though you have questions. So there will also now end with, we'll say goodbye, and there'll be a message from Eva and Alexis at the NBA, and then there will be a virtual going to the pub. That's not us breaking the lockdown, but it is finding a way to meet up in this new virtual world. Okay, so I think that now if I get rid of my camera and wave goodbye to you all, something will miraculously appear on the screen. If not, I've got it wrong. Anyway, lovely talking to people, even if I couldn't see you.
Hello, my name is Eva Tate, and I'm the Major Appeals Manager and Manager of the Rare Dementia Support Fund, held by the charity The National Brain Appeal. The National Brain Appeal raises money as the dedicated charity for the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and UCL Queen's Square Institute of Neurology. The National Brain Appeal raises funds for Rare Dementia Support's 2,000 members to help individuals living with rare and early onset forms of dementia, their families, friends, and healthcare professionals. And we also hold several other funds for FTD and dementia research. The funding helps not only the support group meetings in London, but also the regional support groups, admin and support staff, and all other associated expenses, including the new online support groups. When things return to normal, there are travel and accommodation bursaries available to help members attend the meetings. This year, we've raised our fundraising target to 300,000, and this will rise further to 350,000 by 2022 to develop and extend the service in the areas of education, support, and research, with the ultimate aim that everyone affected by a form of rare dementia will have access to specialist information and support, as well as contact with other people with a similar condition. We apply for grants from grant-making trusts, foundations and livery companies, and have a wonderful group of supporters, some of whom are here today, who fundraise for us in an amazing variety of ways. We would love it if you would like to sign up to our RDS fundraising newsletter to hear more of these stories and receive news of how we can support this community. We have had people do head shaves for us. We have had a gentleman drive across the Mongolian steppe in a VW Polo, and we have lots of people who take part in runs and virtual runs as well. At the end of February, we held a gala dinner called Mission Possible, where we raised 110,000 for the expansion of rare dementia support. And we are delighted to announce that in line with this expansion, the charity is committed to raise up to 7 million to create the world's first centre of excellence for rare dementias. If anyone would like to discuss any fundraising ideas or the new capital appeal, please do feel free to email me or my colleague Alexis, our Senior Fundraising Manager, who will speak about the innovative new ways you can be involved in fundraising for RDS, even during this challenging time. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Alexis Gebby and I'm the Senior Fundraising Officer at the National Brain Appeal. I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to all of you who already fundraise for RDS. We really appreciate all of your incredible efforts, especially at this difficult time. My role at the National Brain Appeal is to look after all the amazing people taking on various fundraising activities for us. We have had people challenging themselves to run marathons, cycle long distances, climb mountains, and even take on skydives, all whilst raising money for RDS. We also have wonderful fundraisers out in the community who organise golf days, hold coffee mornings, host choir and carol concerts, and even shave their heads. These people ensure that more people like you can be supported through rare dementia support. If you're interested in becoming one of our fundraising heroes, then please do contact me. I am here to support you with your fundraising, and I'm more than happy to chat about any ideas that you may have. While at the moment it isn't possible to take part in a sporting challenge or hold a big fundraising gathering in your local community, we do have some fundraising ideas, such as taking on a solo virtual run or walk, hosting a quiz for your friends or family online, asking for birthday donations in lieu of going out, or even donating money that you may be saving by not travelling to work or buying your daily coffee. Do get in touch with me if you would like to get involved. In the meantime, take care and we hope to see you soon.